Two shooters and a magic bullet. Those words echo with their simplicity, but when examined together, paint a damning portrait. A picture of a cover-up so bold, so in your face, that it seems almost impossible. But for some people, this theory is more than that. It's a cold, dark reality. Charlie Kirk, to many in America, was a beloved figure, and so naturally, when they watched his publicly televised execution on their phone screens about a month ago, they reacted with pure horror. And immediately, people tried to make sense of what had happened. Who could have wanted Charlie dead? Who was able to pull this thing off? Quickly, the government provided a narrative that's been debunked, but a narrative nonetheless. A young man named Tyler Robinson had seemingly snapped, committed the crime, dumped the evidence near the crime scene, and had texted someone a detailed confession which corroborated every detail that the FBI had presented. It seemed almost too perfect. Well, that's because in the eyes of many people, it was. The FBI's timeline unfolds, as we talked about already in another recent video, with a mechanical precision. At approximately 12:23 and 30 seconds on September 10th, Charlie Kirk, seated on stage, sustains a neck wound from a .30-06 round fired by Tyler Robinson from the rooftop roughly 142 yards away. Tyler Robinson, a 22-year-old gamer with a family heirloom Mauser Model 98 rifle, allegedly etched anti-fascist slogans on his casings and confessed in messages to his partner about planning the hit amid frustration with Charlie Kirk's hatred. The weapon, modified with a modern barrel for .30-06 compatibility, was recovered in the woods near the crime scene later that day, wrapped in a towel, which, coincidentally and very luckily for the FBI, had Tyler Robinson's DNA on it. Now, Utah Governor Spencer Cox later described Tyler Robinson's shift from a family of republicanism to leftist politics as potentially having been a radicalization arc. According to the authorities, though, there were no accomplices. There was no broader plot. All this was a lone gunman exploiting the lax security on a public campus to carry out a singular, rash, evil deed. This narrative, however, hinges exclusively on unchallenged assumptions. The rifle's traceability, the bullet wound and trajectory, and Tyler Robinson's sole culpability. Yet, as independent voices like firearms analyst Gary of Paramount Recovery have noted, quote, "Every time new information comes out, we get more questions than answers," end quote. Stephen Gardner, another credible source per Gary, has publicly echoed this sentiment as well, drawing from testimony given to him by witnesses close to Turning Point USA, Charlie Kirk's organization. According to many, the bullet's fragmentation and lodging in Charlie's body seems to defy, against all odds, standard .30-06 behavior. A little more context though. The .30-06 Springfield, a century-old cartridge born from World War I battlefields, is renowned for its versatility in hunting and long-range shooting. Loaded with a 150-grain Nosler ballistic tip, the weapon can achieve potential muzzle velocities of 2,910 feet per second, delivering 2,820 foot-pounds of energy, which, to put it plainly, is enough force to kill a massive elk from 500 yards away. In ballistic gelatin tests, rounds fired from a .30-06 Springfield penetrate a whopping 20 to 30 inches through the gelatin before exiting, and most of the time, they do exit the gelatin block after penetrating that distance, often with a yawing that creates cavities up to 12 inches wide. So, according to many people online, I talked about this a lot in my last video, if the gun used really was a .30-06, and if the shot really was taken from that distance and really did hit with that precision, the death of Charlie Kirk should have looked a lot different. There should have been blood. A lot more blood, I should say. There should have been a much larger wound. There should have been a spray of blood behind Charlie splattering across the canvas backdrop which hung behind him. There also, as many people have noted, should have been an exit wound. However, none of that happened. According to the FBI and eyewitnesses, along with Charlie's surgeon, there was no exit wound. Obviously, there was no blood sprayed behind him, there was only a small wound up front. So, when looking at the gun and looking at the wound and analyzing the distance, how does this make any sense? You have experts that have worked with these weapons for their entire lives, hunters, people that have served tours, people that just love guns and know them inside out. And they're all saying that this clearly wasn't the weapon used in the shooting and that it had to have been something smaller. and potentially that it had to have been fired from a different angle. But on the flip side of the coin, you have the FBI and the authorities, who we all know have lied to the American people thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of times, saying that their story is the truth and that you should just never question it. It was a 30-06, and that's just what it looked like. So, who are we supposed to believe? There's also the fact that Andrew Colvert, a man associated with Turning Point USA, publicly claimed after the assassination that Charlie Kirk was essentially struck by a magic bullet. Yes, he claimed that the result of the assassination was a miracle, some sort of spiritual intervention. Instead of the bullet going straight through Charlie, potentially hitting someone else and sending blood and gore flying that day, a miracle happened, and Charlie Kirk's body actually managed to stop the bullet. Andrew even referred to Charlie as the Man of Steel, claiming that he was almost like Superman in his ability to stop bullets. However, this conclusion defies all known science and research surrounding these weapons and bullets, and is frankly just unbelievable. I want you to consider, if you're watching or listening, which possibility is more realistic. That Charlie Kirk experienced some sort of magical religious miracle, stopped the bullet with his body, and prevented anyone else from getting hurt, or that the FBI and other authorities have been lying about just what type of bullet was fired at Charlie Kirk and where that bullet was fired from. I'll leave that up to you to decide. I'm not talking down on or minimizing any sort of religion that you guys might hold close to your hearts or any sort of spiritual belief system you might have. I just want you to consider what is more realistic in this case. Now, this is where things get really interesting. By the way, before we get into this, please make sure you comment on this video, tell me what you think of this whole thing, like this video, subscribe to the channel, or share the video out on your social media. YouTube does not like these sorts of videos. They do not push these sorts of videos. So this entire channel, what we've built here, has been entirely grassroots. And I'm so thankful to every single person who has joined me along the way on this journey. And yeah, just if you could please leave a comment or a like, I would really appreciate it. But let's dig into it. Charlie Kirk's autopsy, per leaked details that have been corroborated by Turning Point USA insiders, tells a completely different story of what may have happened that day. Just take a look at this.
My understanding from speaking with a couple of people high up at Turning Point USA, they let me know that the injury took place right below the jaw in the C2. The bullet crashed through C2 all the way through C7. And then they found the bullet lodged in that meaty area around T1, the thoracic first vertebrae.
I confirmed, obviously, because I have connections, and I confirmed that the autopsy was done. I don't want to say too much, but the autopsy yielded where the entry wound was and how the bullet killed him. It's already been determined. They found the bullet lodged in his body. They can tell you exactly where, what was severed, what killed him, where the bullet traveled from his neck down through his body. They have it all, fragmentation of the round that spouted through his body. They have all of that.
As of October 8th, 2025, the full autopsy report on Charlie Kirk's death remains sealed and unreleased to the public by the Utah Office of the Medical Examiner. Despite state law, Utah Code 26B8217, effective May 7th of this year, mandating autopsies for all homicides and allowing limited public access under certain conditions. This opacity, or rather lack of transparency, has fueled public speculation, but partial details have emerged through official statements, prosecutorial filings, and insider medical disclosures. According to officials and insiders, an autopsy was indeed performed shortly after Charlie Kirk's death on September 10th at the State Medical Examiner's Office in Salt Lake City, involving one of 8 board-certified forensic pathologists on staff. The procedure was expedited though, lasting only approximately 1 to 2 hours due to the high-profile nature of the case and the involvement of the FBI. The hasty autopsy was performed in order to allow Charlie Kirk's body to be released and transported to Phoenix, Arizona for his eventual embalming and memorial services. Now, contrary to early rumors amplified on social media, such as a false circulated 911 audio clip falsely claiming no autopsy was performed before the death certificate was issued, this was debunked as misinformation. The most detailed publicly available insights come from statements by Turning Point USA spokesman Andrew Colvert and the attending trauma surgeon at Intermountain Utah Valley Hospital, where Kirk was pronounced dead approximately 10 to 15 minutes post-shooting. These statements, which I already talked about before, about the magic bullet that Charlie's body miraculously stopped, align with preliminary medical summaries referenced in the charging documents filed on September 16th of this year by Utah County prosecutors, which describe a single entry wound to the front left of Charlie's neck, but curiously, they omit granular pathology and instead choose to focus almost solely on evidentiary links to suspect Tyler Robinson. The entry point where the bullet entered Charlie's body is consistently reported as having been the front left neck area, approximately at or below the level of the Adam's apple, based on video evidence which shows blood emanating from that precise location after Charlie was shot. I have indeed seen that video many times at this point, and there's no denying that that was right where he was struck, right about here. No exit wound, though, was observed, as I stated before. The .30-06 Springfield round, fired from a bolt-action rifle, which was recovered near the rooftop, seemed to have lodged itself subcutaneously, or just beneath the skin, at the back of Charlie's neck, without fully traversing the body. Well, that's at least according to the report. Pathologically, the bullet's trajectory is described as having been shallow and destructive within the neck tissues, causing severe vascular damage, likely damage to the jugular vein or carotid artery, which led to rapid exsanguination, hemorrhage, and hypovolemic shock. Charlie Kirk's surgeon actually attributed the round's failure to penetrate more to an alleged exceptional bone density in Charlie Kirk's cervical vertebrae, which slowed and fragmented the projectile upon impact with the C3 to 5 region of the spine, preventing spinal cord transection but still inducing catastrophic soft tissue trauma. This analysis is supposedly supported by EMS records noting non-pulsatile blood flow from Charlie's wound, indicating venous involvement rather than arterial spurting, and Charlie Kirk's pupils being fixed and dilated while en route to the hospital are a sign of terminal brain anoxia from blood loss. The official cause of death is gunshot wound to the neck with massive internal hemorrhage. The toxicology results weren't negative, and no pre-existing conditions contributed to Charlie's death, according to those leaks that were made to media outlets. Now, these details, I should say, and there's a lot of dense terminology here, but we're going to get to some visuals in a second. These details emerged one at a time. First, there were the initial hospital statements on September 11th, focused on Charlie's neck trauma and death, and by September 21st, Andrew Colvett had tweeted and referenced the surgeon's miracle comment about the magical bullet and no exit wound. And on October 2nd, fact-checked consolidated conflicting reports that had been spread in the media into a cohesive narrative of shallow bullet penetration. Essentially, everyone seemed to come together in the end and stick to a very specific story. Charlie Kirk was shot from the front, the bullet barely penetrated him, it hit an artery or a vein, and he died. According to the leaks, the slug that actually killed Charlie was indeed recovered during his autopsy, and it was found to have been intact enough for rifling analysis, though its exact deformation, like yawing or fragmentation, remains officially undisclosed. But to many, this leaked information makes no sense at all. To contextualize the autopsy findings, consider the .30-06 Springfield's established performance in both battles and hunting excursions, which starkly contrasts with the reported shallow path and limited penetration in Charlie Kirk's case. Developed in 1906 for US military use and refined during World War I, this cartridge is prized and, once again, typically utilized for big game hunting due to its flat trajectory and terminal ballistics. Essentially, all of this, everything that I've said so far, is a very long-winded way of saying that typically this round fired from this weapon creates much more carnage when it hits a target. For example, when elk are shot from hundreds of yards away, much further away than the distance that Charlie Kirk was shot from, its bones shatter. It's a gruesome sight. And elk are massive creatures with 1.5 to 2 times the bone density of humans. It really makes you think, doesn't it? This same gun and same round can take down a 1,000+ pound elk from more than double the distance, and it still hits with such power that it shatters the elk's bones, leaves massive gaping bloody wounds, which looks nothing like what happened to Charlie. At around 142 yards, the estimated distance from the Lossy Center rooftop to Charlie Kirk's position where he was shot, The round fired from the rifle should have retained a velocity of 1,800 to 2,000 feet per second and a power of 1,200 to 1,500 feet per pound, far exceeding thresholds for full tissue traversal in a human torso. You see, typically a round will penetrate anywhere from 12 to 18 inches through a human neck or chest. Yet, the autopsy of Charlie's body indicates that only around 6 to 8 inches of flesh were penetrated. There was entry at the anterior neck, deflection off of cervical vertebrae, and lodgement posteriorly without spinal severance or an exit wound. Forensic pathologists online have noted this fact as being extremely anomalous and bizarre, but technically plausible if the bullet struck Charlie at a shallow angle, like 30 to 45 degrees downward from the elevated rooftop, thus maximizing bone interaction. The surgeon's bone density explanation, though, while anecdotal, echoes cases where atypical skeletal robustness fragments high-velocity projectiles, as seen in historical military autopsies. Basically saying that according to historical records and previously documented incidents, human bones have at times been strong enough to cause a bullet to sort of behave in a similar fashion. Charlie Kirk, at age 31 and physically active, fit the profile of someone whose bones could have been dense enough to cause this sort of activity. However, no quantitative densitometry scans from the autopsy have been released to substantiate the claim that Charlie's bones were incredibly dense, irregularly, unnaturally dense enough to stop a magical bullet. They haven't released any information stating, yeah, we said that his bullets are dense, but here, we've run the tests and check this out, they're actually dense. It's essentially their word against ours at this point. But before we get into the next portion of this theory, you need to understand a few basic things about the human skeleton and human anatomy. The human spine consists of 33 vertebrae, divided into 5 regions. There is the cervical vertebrae, C1 through C7, the top 7 vertebrae in the neck, which support the skull and allow head movement. There's the thoracic vertebrae, T1 through T12, the 12 vertebrae in the upper and mid back connected to the rib cage. There's the lumbar, L1 to L5, the 5 vertebrae in the lower back bearing much of the body's weight. There's the sacral, S1 through S5, 5 fused vertebrae forming the sacrum, part of the pelvis, and the coccygeal, or tailbone. Each vertebrae is named by its region and number. For example, the C1 is the first cervical vertebrae, and the spinal cord, a bundle of nerves running through the vertebrae, carries signals between the brain and your body. A bullet hitting the spine can damage the vertebrae or bones, the spinal cord and nerves, or both, leading to varying degrees of disability or death. Now, the cervical vertebrae, or the C1, C2 vertebrae, are critical because they're closest to the brain and they control vital functions. A bullet that hits this area is often life-threatening or catastrophic due to the spinal cord's role in breathing, heart rate, and movement. C1 Atlas is the first cervical vertebrae, named after the mythological figure who carried the world, as it supports the skull. It forms a ring-like structure that allows the head to nod, like when you're saying yes, and a bullet hitting C1 could fracture the bone, destabilize the skull-spine connection, or sever the spinal cord, often causing instant death or high-level paralysis like quadriplegia due to its proximity to the brainstem. Then there's the C2 vertebrae, the axis, the second cervical vertebrae, which has a peg-like projection that allows the head to rotate, like when you're saying no. A bullet to the C2 can fracture the dens or vertebral body, potentially damaging the spinal cord and leading to paralysis or loss of functions like breathing if the injury is severe. The other cervical vertebrae, C3 through C7, protect the spinal cord and support your neck movement. Injuries here can cause partial paralysis or disrupt nerve signals to the body, depending on the level of damage. Now, this all might be a little confusing, and it's definitely some dense information, but that explanation and knowledge will come in handy in just a second. So let's move into a few examples. I recently came across a video here on YouTube from the creator Valhalla VFT. I've actually seen some of his content before. If he's watching this, what's up, dude? And I absolutely loved it. So I have to give a massive shout out to him and his channel, and I need to tell y'all to go subscribe to him if you aren't subscribed already. He's been on top of this Charlie Kirk stuff since day one, and I have to give him lots of credit for the work that he's done. But Right now, we're going to take a look at a few clips from a recent video that he released where he actually went through and analyzed what the autopsy reports say about the magical bullet that struck Charlie, the proposed trajectory of the round, and the truth behind the claims. The first clip is him analyzing the official story and report. Just take a look.
All right, guys, so basically a middle school math problem. This isn't that hard to figure out. We know that, according to the medical examiner report, this 30-06 round came in, hit him in the C2, traveled down. All right, you guys are going to notice some huge problems with this right away, but let's go ahead and, just look at this objectively. All right, we got a protractor out. Let's put that right here on the C2. Okay, we do know, again, from where Tyler Robinson was shooting, it was a 9-degree slope with a 9-degree offset, essentially meaning almost directly on at a 9-degree slope, which we can travel out from our protractor from the C2 here at 9 degrees. Perfect. All right, as we pull the protractor off, what's the first huge glaring issue you guys are going to see here? Oh, well, if Charlie Kirk was sitting level, sort of parallel to the ground with his jaw, which he was, let me show you that real quick. All right, so we can see Charlie Kirk is not got his head all the way back like this. He's sitting pretty much flat, looking at the crowd, sort of jaw parallel to the ground as he gets hit. Boom, hit. So you can see that, right? It's actually a little bit of a tilt down even, okay? So let's look at this anatomically. All right, this is essentially exactly how Charlie Kirk is sitting. And they want to tell you the medical examiner report confirms he was first hit in the C2 vertebrae right below the base of the skull. Biggest problem I see with that from the angle Tyler Robinson shoots him from is that would have hit him in the teeth or even above the teeth. There is no possible way that this round came from a 9-degree angle and a 9-degree slope and hit the C2 while not blowing through Charlie Kirk's face. It's not a thing. We also can see the C2 is not where that gunshot wound is. I can show you that right here. All right, as you can see here, yeah, he's got some tilt back now after he's been hit, but that round, sorry for my beard, that round is 2-3 inches below his chin. Okay, this round is not all the way up just underneath the base of the jaw. It's pretty far down. I would say that's closer to the C4 or the C5 to where that round, to me, looks like he got hit. So big problems right away with this medical examiner report, but let's keep looking at this. All right, so we know this is not possible. Okay, this definitely didn't happen. But if we look at the actual sort of injury to Kirk, looks like he's shot closer to about right here, okay, on that left side of the neck. Now, if we look at it this way, now we can make this work for the location of the shot if it enters and hits the C5, but that's not what they're saying. They're saying it hit the C2, traveled down all his vertebrae. It doesn't work.
So as you can see there, just based on the initial analysis, to make this theory work, according to the leaked autopsy results and report, Charlie Kirk would have had to have been shot through the teeth to make the angle and spine strike location work, which clearly is not what happened. We've seen the footage, we know where Charlie was hit and how he reacted, but as Valhalla VFT continues to analyze all of this, things just get stranger and stranger.
Next thing with this, we're talking about a 30-06 round. Right now you have this 30-06 round traveling at 24 to 2,700 feet per second, or even less, doesn't even matter. Hits him, let's say, hits him in the C2, if this magic bullet that doesn't go through his face somehow. That then refracts straight down into the T1. Yeah, that's not what a 30-06 round is going to do if it hits a human neck vertebrae. We know it's going to blow right through. But even if there was some weird refraction, bullets aren't going to refract almost 90 degrees. We've talked about that, and then keep their actual velocity to be able to do that much damage. Not really a thing.
So as you're seeing there, the proposed trajectory of the bullet, based on the leaked alleged autopsy reporting, makes absolutely no sense. A bullet traveling almost 3,000 feet per second, delivering almost 3,000 pounds of power, it wouldn't have done what they're saying that it did. In addition, the path of the bullet makes absolutely no sense. The path that they're saying the bullet traveled in, it's absolutely egregious when you actually look at a visual depiction of this, like the one Valhalla VFT created, and it becomes incredibly unbelievable. In his video, he then begins to theorize and hypothesize based on the alleged leaked data on what potentially actually could have happened that day. And based on his analysis, the results are nothing short of disturbing.
All right, so I've seen a bunch of different people talking about now, because of this report, this has to prove that Charlie Kirk had body armor because, again, it's an impossible shot. It's an impossible angle that it didn't hit him in the face, which, okay, that's kind of an interesting theory, but let's talk about that, all right? Now we're talking about body armor, which, again, is going to be down here on the chest. Again, 9-degree slope. This is still where the shot came from. Here's the entrance wound. Okay, let's talk about the possibility that the bullet refracted off his body armor. First, let's also make sure that we acknowledge it's been disproven he had body armor on. And not only that, TPUSA has publicly stated he had no body armor on. So if you're going to operate under the assumption he has body armor on, you are calling TPUSA nefarious liars. I'm not prepared to do that, because why would they purposefully lie about him having body armor on? That seems bizarre to me. But hypothetically, TPUSA is lying about this and he had body armor on. Let's look at it. Now, we're still talking about a 30-06 round, okay? A 30-06 round that supposedly comes down, hits him in the body armor, which, by the way, if he had body armor on so small that you couldn't see it through that tiny little shirt, it wouldn't be strong enough to stop a 30-06 round to begin with. But we're in hypothetics here. That then... okay, this almost makes me laugh doing this. That then refracts off the body armor, comes all the way up here at a 90-degree angle to hit this C2, and then re-refracts straight back down to the T1. Guys, bullets are not pinballs. They don't do this, okay? They refract and do weird things as they move through, but changing total direction in almost 180 degrees is not possible. This is Newtonian physics says that's not a thing.
That's interesting because in a lot of discourse surrounding the Charlie Kirk case, I've read people theorizing that he potentially might have had body armor on, but like the original creator of that video stated, Turning Point USA has consistently denied that Charlie had any body armor on his body that day, and it also just doesn't make any logical sense. The whole thing makes absolutely no sense to me, but especially in this context, when you see this whole thing, bullet path, velocity, angles, all of it mapped out, it just seems to be almost impossible.
Again, we know he supposedly gets hit in the C2 first by the medical examiner's report. Well, let's look at that. We know where the actual wound is, which is here. Okay, well, we know it can't have come from that slope. Again, it goes straight through his teeth. Not a thing, unless his head was like literally all the way back. So what would it take for this round to have hit him where it hit him as an entrance wound and hit him in the C2 first? We can find that out pretty easily. We can start at the C2. We can come down with our angle here, and we can see that it actually would take a 38-degree upward angle for this to have potentially hit him where it hit him and then also hit the C2 first if he was shot from the front. Does that make a whole lot of sense? Well, maybe if the tunnel theory works. I don't know. That one seemed weird at the time. And then also keep in mind, the round still has to travel then straight back down, which bullets don't do. They don't do this, okay, guys? You would expect a bullet to refract out this way, refract up this way. It's not going to reverse this massive direction back the other way.
This to me is the most interesting portion of the argument that Valhalla VFT actually presents. To make this work, to make the alleged findings of the autopsy work, and to make this whole thing really make sense, Charlie, technically, according to this analysis, would have had to have been shot from below. If his body were to have been struck initially at the C2 near the top of the spine, the angle, in theory, would have had to have been drastically different than the one being presented in the alleged autopsy and medical findings. I mean, really, when you actually take a look at all of this and analyze the information gathered and presented, it seems like what they suggested happened is the most improbable series of events. Think about that. If this is the real autopsy, they're saying he was struck in the C2 near the very top of your spine. So imagine that. Touch the back of your neck. Feel how high up your spine goes up here. And they're saying that he was shot from above directly into that C2 area, which, like he pointed out, would mean that he would have had to have been shot through the teeth to go straight back to his neck there. Because you're shooting up, according to the official story. You're not shooting down. Now, if you're shooting below and the bullet goes up, that makes more sense. But just looking at it from the official story side of things, it's just lunacy.
Now, the really popular theory that Rob O'Neill just talked about, and Range Day Bros talked about, a lot of people have talked about, which I have not discounted at all, have talked about him being shot from up and behind him. This is very interesting because this actually, besides one little piece, which is that they found around inside of him, this actually potentially makes the medical examiner report work with the injury and ballistics that all potentially work. Let's take a look at that. The C2 is going to be just behind the jaw there, as we've seen it, right? Now, if he gets shot from the back upper right, and again, we don't know what that angle would be because this is all hypothetical, right? We don't know where that shooter was, but anywhere you would think around the way the buildings were, they're all about that height, anywhere from like a 10 to maybe 15 degree angle here. Now, all of a sudden, if he's getting shot in the back right of the head that comes beneath the skull, anatomically, this actually works. It comes in the back underneath his skull, hits him in the C2, and then blows out at a normal refraction angle exactly where we expect to see the exit wound in this case. That actually works perfectly, ballistically, anatomically, to have created that initial impact into the C2. It probably blows down here through the C4, does some damage through C5, C6, through C7 through cavitation. The biggest issue here is this is an exit wound, which means there would be no bullet found inside Charlie's body. That goes against the medical examiner's report.
So the behind the back to the side shot actually makes sense in this scenario, which would imply a second shooter who has yet to be identified. But what makes this hypothetical situation also fall apart is that, like he just said, that would make the wound on Charlie's neck an exit wound, which would mean that a bullet would not have been found in Charlie's neck during the autopsy, and also there would have been a wound on the back of his neck, which goes against all published information. So it's highly unlikely, but it is possible in the context of this analysis. I mean, who knows? Maybe the bullet wasn't there in the first place. Maybe it's just a cover-up of a cover-up. You never really know. Things are just strange in this story, if you couldn't tell by now. Very, very strange.
All right, and then there's one final potential here, and that was actually brought forward by Peak Prosperity. This is a fantastic video if you haven't seen it either. And he actually had the theory that the shot came from technically the front, but from a much more drastic angle, almost like a 45-degree angle. So we can look at that here too. All right, now, so this theory states that it must have come from a far more horizontal angle, right? It's because the front angle doesn't work at all, which I agree with, to come maybe up underneath the jaw. Even then, it's going to be tough where this comes to get to the C2. I don't think you do. I still think you get in the C4, but to cause the actual damage at a much more steep angle, now all of a sudden, the refraction as this comes in and comes through here, the refraction comes down and potentially works that way. That's actually a bullet refraction that makes sense. All right, but then the biggest problem we have with this is then this probably doesn't hit him in the C2 either. So where are we left? What's the problem? Well, the problem is that the official narrative with Tyler Robinson, where he took the shot from the angle he took the shot, like I told you at the start of the video, with the type of weapon that he used, is not possible and does not match the medical examiner's report anatomically or mathematically. It doesn't work. So you have to then either say the medical examiner's report can't be right or Tyler Robinson isn't the shooter. These things cannot be true at the same time as far as we're sort of understanding it with science and math and physics. So what's the real story? Don't know.
So none of this really makes sense, as you can see. There are a lot of theories floating around out there, a lot of people claiming that a lot of different people or parties were responsible for the shooting, but what we don't really have a lot of right now is truth and clarity. We just have questions, unanswered questions with no real answers seemingly in sight. There's also something I want to show you right here.
One thing I wanted to bring up to you, I didn't know if you know this, but Utah is actually one of the very few states that they don't have to release public records about autopsies.
Oh, okay.
So they could cherry pick what gets released. So if you have a contact at Turning Point USA, that might be I also have someone who sent me a message from Fox, and they have already tried to request autopsy documentation, and they were told no, that in the state of Utah, they do not release them to the public. So if we get information during the trial or if whatever Turning Point USA decides to release, that will be the extent of what the public is given.
Yes, you heard that right. In Utah, they seem to have a specific law, or really a specific sort of loophole, which essentially in boiled down format makes it to where the authorities technically do not have to release autopsy reports or reports of that manner. And that's when you have to start asking questions yourself. Could this event have potentially been pre-planned by some group, some foreign body, some intelligence service to take place in a state where the cover-up would be easier to execute than in other states? Or was this really just coincidence? In this line of work, I don't believe in coincidences, and you shouldn't either. But what does all of this leave us with? Well, the autopsy, which officially remains sealed to this day, and the video ambiguities and irregularities, for example, the graphic footage showing Charlie Kirk's slow backwards collapse with limited initial blood, which defies the logic of what they're saying happened, have spawned a proliferation of theories on the internet, with theories being built from ballistic inconsistencies, withheld evidence, and Charlie Kirk's political profile and decisions, like, for example, his recent anti-Israel donor critiques. One of the biggest theories that I've seen floating around is the Mike Pack explosion, or IED theory. This viral hypothesis posits that an improvised explosive device, or IED, was concealed that day within Charlie Kirk's Rode Wireless Pro lapel microphone, which you can visibly see planted on his chest before the shooting. The theory claims that this miniature explosive device was detonated remotely via an acoustic trigger, like an audible rifle crack as a signal, or potentially was even triggered by someone who was there in the audience that day. I've seen videos of the shooting, and I do have to admit, there's one specific angle that shows a member of Charlie Kirk's team seemingly clicking or messing with something in his chest pocket right as the fatal shot is fired. That almost looks like he clicks something in his pocket and then Kirk is shot. The timing, just visually upon looking at it, appears to be incredibly suspicious. Proponents of this theory constantly cite evidence that can be observed in video footage from that day. For example, there's the omnidirectional fabric displacement on Charlie's t-shirt. You know how his shirt jumps right as he's shot, suggesting a spherical blast over pressure, not linear bullet yaw. I've seen this come up a lot. Why did Kirk's shirt seem to explode on its own in a completely different area than where the bullet allegedly struck him in the neck? Also, they point out the fact that there's no shock plume visible in pixel flow vector mapping across multi-angle footage, which theorists claim should have been visible if the official story is really what happened. Talking in more detail, researchers have used online pixel flow vector mapping, a technique that tracks down pixel movement in videos to analyze the multi-angle footage of Kirk's assassination, and they claim that the absence of a shock plume or a visible air distortion from a high-velocity bullet suggests that the shooting may not have involved a real bullet fired from that same claimed location. It's very interesting for sure, and I could potentially talk more about all this analysis in another video, but we can save that discussion for another day. To put it plainly, the video doesn't show to some people what it's supposed to show. Analysis of the video shows, to them, a bold-faced lie. However, a little bit of factual rebuttal to this theory and why I'm not so sure that this would have been possible. There was no explosive residue, like for example C4 traces, in any of the preliminary forensic sweeps that were performed and then referenced in the FBI affidavits, and the full microphone and mic pack itself was recovered from the scene, intact, allegedly, for analysis. Now, you do have to take all of that with a grain of salt because, after all, this is the FBI telling us this, who we in this video are saying are lying, but it's also important to note that fact. Also, independent journalists and hawk-eyed viewers online have enhanced the footage of the moment that Kirk was shot for themselves, and they claim that in their analysis, they found micro vibrations in the video consistent with bullet air displacement, not any sort of controlled detonation. The theory persists though due to the t-shirt ruffle and obviously the angle at which Charlie really had to have been shot at if the autopsy report is going to make any sense, but it should be noted that high velocity shockwaves can disturb light fabric via something called bow wave pressure, which can be observed in hydrodynamic models. Another theory proposed by some online to explain what really happened suggests that the round actually first struck Charlie Kirk's chest, which according to this theory was protected by an AR-500 steel plate vest that he reportedly wore routinely. And then the bullet, after striking this armor, ricocheted upwards into his neck, which would, in theory, explain the shallow path and entry wound appearing to some as an exit wound. Eyewitnesses and frame-by-frame breakdowns highlight that 4-inch chest impact puff, that thing that comes off his chest that can be seen on Charlie's shirt before the neck begins bleeding, with something called the rifleman's rule being cited as deflecting the shot high. Digging into the rifleman's rule, when you shoot at an angle, uphill or downhill, the effective gravitational pull on the bullet is reduced compared to shooting on a level plane. Gravity acts perpendicular to the Earth's surface, but when shooting at an angle, only a component of gravity proportional to the cosine of the angle affects the bullet's drop along the line of sight to the target. This reduced gravitational effect means the bullet doesn't drop as much as it would on flat ground, causing the shot to impact higher than the shooter might expect if they use the same aim for a level shot. This, to some, is evidence used to justify this theory that the shooter really missed his shot. It hit a chest plate that Charlie was wearing, and then it bounced upwards into his neck at an angle. However, debunking this for a moment, we do have to mention the fact that it has been confirmed by multiple sources that Charlie Kirk was not wearing a bulletproof vest or any protection like that on the day he was killed. If he was wearing one though, and maybe once again we're being lied to, this would indeed fit the damage profile. For example, the deformed slug recovered from Charlie's body would match the ricochet tumbling seen in the autopsy report. Ricochet tumbling occurs when a bullet, after striking a surface, deflects and vibrates and shakes around unpredictably and spins or tumbles within the object that it was shot inside of due to the impact altering its stability and trajectory. However, vector analysis performed on footage of the shooting from 3 different angles shows no primary chest vector, only secondary neck displacement. And so, due to these factors, many have counted this theory as false. Now, the theory that I find to be one of the most believable would be the low velocity or close range shot, potentially from behind theory. This theory theorizes that a suppressed .50 caliber PCP airgun or pistol could have been fired at Charlie from somewhere in the crowd or from behind him. Proponents of this theory cite the minimal blood loss seen when Charlie is shot, the small entry wound, the lack of an exit wound, Charlie's slow collapse, and the fact that there was no forward snap from Charlie going forward after suffering a high-velocity rifle shot from the front. There are a lot of mysterious characters in the Charlie Kirk assassination story. There's the distraction, the immediate fall guy, George Zinn. There are the employees that acted strange that day. There's the guy who ran to snatch the camera card from the camera mounted behind Charlie, the security guard who seemed to grab something from Charlie's pocket after he was shot and hand it to someone. There's so much to talk about. So many suspicious individuals involved. But focusing in on this theory, the main facet, I would say, is the fact that most people online seem to agree that a true .30-06 Grizzly round would definitely have left an exit wound on Charlie's body, which, as we all know, according to the official story, it didn't. This theory suggests that Charlie had to have been struck by a low-velocity projectile, fired from a much smaller weapon, traveling roughly around 800 to 1,000 feet per second, and it's claimed that these conditions would have had to have been met in order for the observed 1 to 2 pints of blood that Charlie lost to really make sense. People have spent time endlessly analyzing the footage from that day. There are some people who claim they can visually see a second shooter. There are people saying there's other evidence that they noticed, like I said, the security guys acting weird, the hand signals, all of that stuff, but none of it is really conclusive. And this whole rabbit hole is indeed pretty interesting. Diverging for a second, we have to talk about the fact that Charlie Kirk for years had been a vocal pro-Israel advocate, frequently defending the Jewish state against campus anti-Semitism and social media disinformation. However, in the lead up to his death, some conservatives, including podcaster Candace Owens, have stated that Charlie had been souring on Israel and Netanyahu's leadership, fueling conspiracy theories that Israel might have been involved in his death. And I do think that it's all a little bit strange. It is known, based on leaked group chat messages, that just before his death, literally a few days before he was shot and killed, in a message with influential members of the Turning Point USA team and other leaders in his life, stated the following. This is the exact text exchange, which has been confirmed to be true by Turning Point USA. Charlie Kirk just lost another huge Jewish donor, $2 million a year because we won't cancel Tucker. I'm thinking of inviting Candace. Ugh, Jewish donors play into all the stereotypes. I cannot and will not be bullied like this, leaving me no choice but to leave the pro-Israel cause. Now, That's pretty bizarre. We know that Israel, as a political state, has committed countless crimes over the years and been given a free pass by American leadership. For example, there's the Promise scandal, which I've talked about many times on the show, where Israel was involved in the sale of technology in America that had a virtual back door built into it, which allowed Israeli intelligence to spy on American agencies and government bodies. There's obviously the Epstein scandal, which I've talked about extensively on the channel. It's known that Epstein had deep ties to both Israeli political figures and the Israeli intelligence apparatus. Epstein was no doubt operating as an intelligence asset not only for Israel but also for America. There's also the USS Liberty incident, which occurred on June 8, 1967 during the Six-Day War, when Israeli air and naval forces attacked the American intelligence ship, the USS Liberty, in international waters off the Sinai Peninsula, killing 34 crew members and injuring 171. That's right, Israeli air and naval forces attacked a US ship, killed 34 crew members, American GIs, and injured 171 more. Now, Israel claimed that this was nothing more than a case of mistaken identity. They had mistaken the American vessel for an Egyptian ship, but survivors and some US officials have alleged that this was a deliberate attack to prevent the United States from intercepting sensitive Israeli communications. The incident remains controversial, with ongoing debates about the motives and the lack of a definitive resolution, though both governments eventually settled on the accidental attack narrative. Accidental attack. That's right, any other nation that attacked us, killed 34 sailors and 171 were wounded, they'd be an immediate enemy of America. But that was just an accident. Those 34 people killed and 171 injured, just an accident. I'm sorry, guys. Let's just let Israel get away with it. I'm sorry. They didn't mean to do it. It's a total accident, which is bullshit. I'm going to do a whole episode on that soon. It is crazy. The actual stories of people, survivors, seeing them specifically hone into attack and hearing communications from them that day, talking about how they're knowingly attacking the US thing. It's a massive cover up. And obviously, above all, I wholeheartedly condemn the genocide currently occurring in Gaza. What is happening over there to innocent men, women, and most of all, children is morally abhorrent and completely despicable. So the motive in my mind is almost there. Charlie Kirk, one of the largest, most influential voices in all of American conservatism. It would be really hard to find someone in the conservative world in America that had a larger megaphone. He was about to begin speaking out against the genocide in Gaza, and the pro-Israeli lobby was about to lose Charlie Kirk as one of their mouthpieces. Charlie had actually talked about his loss of faith and support for Israel pretty extensively in private and public in the months before his death. And then, bam, before he can flip sides and warn his followers about what's really happening over there, he's silenced forever. Now, this theory is interesting, but it gets even stranger when you consider that shortly after Charlie Kirk was assassinated, Benjamin Netanyahu himself, Israel's prime minister, got in front of a camera and said this.
Well, somebody has fabricated a monstrous big lie that Israel had something to do with Charlie Kirk's horrific murder. This is insane. It is false. It is outrageous. Charlie Kirk was a giant, a once-in-a-century talent who defended freedom, defended America, defended our common Judeo-Christian civilization. Charlie loved Israel. He loved the Jewish people. He told me so in a letter that he sent me just a few months ago. One of my greatest joys as a Christian, he said, is advocating for Israel and forming alliances with Jews to protect Judeo-Christian civilization. He encouraged me to make the case directly to the American people about how vital Israel is to U.S. national security. He told me, the Holy Land is so important to my life, it pains me to see support for Israel slip away. Now, if Charlie disagreed with a policy of mine or a decision here and there, not only did I not mind, I welcomed it. This is the essence of Charlie. This is the essence of a free country. It's exactly what Charlie stood for. And I knew that his suggestions always came from the heart, from his love for Israel and from his love for the Jewish people. A few weeks before his death, I spoke to Charlie. I invited him to visit Israel again. And sadly, That won't happen. Now some are peddling these disgusting rumors, perhaps out of obsession, perhaps with Qatari funding. What I do know is this: Charlie Kirk was a great man, and a great man deserves honor, not lies. Rest in peace, Charlie Kirk. May your memory be a blessing.
So this was posted just shortly after Charlie Kirk's death. A message from the Prime Minister of a foreign country publicly claiming and asserting that they had absolutely nothing to do with an assassination. Doesn't that seem kind of odd to you? There's also the fact that Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu invited Charlie Kirk to come to Israel just a few weeks prior to his public assassination, and Charlie reportedly declined the invite. Then, about a month before his death, Charlie vented his frustration on Megyn Kelly's show that Israeli and Jewish donors were texting him, calling him anti-Semitic for mentioning Epstein's connections to the Mossad and hosting Israel critic Dave Smith at a recent TPUSA event. There's also the fact that Netanyahu posted his condolences to Charlie Kirk and his family before US officials or major news outlets had announced formally Charlie Kirk's death, which has fueled speculation of foreknowledge or potential Israeli intelligence involvement in Kirk's killing. Then there's the letter. Following Kirk's assassination, Netanyahu selectively quoted from a supportive letter that Charlie Kirk had sent him on May 2nd of this year in order to counter emerging claims of Charlie's growing criticism of his leadership and Israel in general. In releasing selected portions of this letter, Netanyahu strategically framed Charlie Kirk as an unwavering ally of Israel in order to, assumedly, bolster Israel's image amongst US conservatives. This partial disclosure of the truth, highlighted in Benjamin Netanyahu's September 18th video statement and X posts, delayed the full release of the 7-page letter amidst mounting demands for transparency, a move perceived by critics as an attempt to control the narrative and to suppress Charlie Kirk's more candid concerns with Netanyahu and Israel. Notably, Netanyahu's selective presentation ignored Charlie Kirk's explicit warnings that he wrote down in the letter about Israel's faltering PR strategy, particularly discussing the risk of losing support amongst the MAGA base and younger conservatives, which fueled accusations that the Israeli leader was prioritizing political expediency over addressing the substantive issues Charlie had raised. The eventual full release of the letter by Netanyahu's office to the New York Post on September 30th only intensified the controversy, as it revealed Charlie Kirk's balanced critique, support laced with urgent advice, leaving others to question the timing and the intent behind Netanyahu's initial selective quotation releases. So he was basically putting out parts of the letter that made Charlie Kirk out to be a fervent supporter of Israel with no critiques and only love, but when the full letter was released, it shows that he was basically critiquing them right to their faces. So, could Israel potentially have played a hand in this? Could this have been an assassination by a foreign government? Keep in mind, people who are viewing this video, and I want to keep this very, very, very clear, critiques of Israel that I make on any of my social media or on my shows have nothing to do with critiques of Judaism or anybody's religion or any ethnic group or people. The critiques that I am making are critiques of a highly corrupted, violent foreign government that is currently committing a genocide against innocent men, women, and children, actively in the public eye in front of everybody, and no one's doing anything about it. It's food for thought, for sure. And finally, there's the magic bullet theory. The magic bullet doubts Echo JFK's assassination lore. How does a high-energy round stop before doing any deeper damage to Charlie Kirk's body or hitting any bystanders or Charlie's surroundings? In the end, these theories thrive on what we do or do not know regarding the official sealed autopsy. And this has all eroded trust in the government, as seen in trends on platforms like X, where the hashtag #CharlieKirkAutopsy garnered over 50,000 posts. The full release of this autopsy could answer some burning questions and provide clarity as to what really happened here. But as officials and commenters online have noted, unchecked speculation and independent analysis of evidence could potentially, according to officials, put the trial and the legitimacy of alleged shooter Tyler Robinson at risk. Something else interesting, though, is that on Tyler Robinson's legal team is a Michael Burt, a lawyer who famously previously defended Joseph Lyle Menendez during the Menendez brothers' first trial in 1993. So, if you really are guilty and you admitted to the crime over text And all of the evidence, the DNA, all the video, all the surveillance, everything connects you to the crime in extremely solid, extremely detailed detail. Why would you have a high-profile, very experienced, infamous lawyer added to your case if you didn't intend to try and fight it? It makes no sense. Shockingly though, Kirk's assassination has some disturbing historical parallels. For example, on April 4th, 1968, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated at the Lorraine Motel in Memphis, Tennessee, while standing on the balcony. He also was struck by a single .30-06 round fired from a Remington Model 760 Game Master rifle, allegedly, we know that that's not true, but according to the story, fired by James Earl Ray from a boarding house across the street, approximately 200 to 300 feet away. The bullet entered the right side of Dr. King's face, fracturing the mandible, and traveled downward through the neck, damaging multiple blood vessels, including the jugular and subclavian arteries, and severing the spinal cord at the lower cervical/upper thoracic level before lodging in the left shoulder area. The trajectory was front to back, right to left, and slightly downward, seemingly consistent with the shooter's elevated position. The autopsy at the time, conducted by a Dr. Jerry Francisco, the Shelby County Medical Examiner, confirmed that the fatal wound caused immediate paralysis due to spinal cord transection and led to death from hemorrhagic shock due to severe blood loss from damaged vessels. A single bullet was recovered from the body, with no evidence of multiple fragments or unusual ballistic behavior beyond the expected effects. The injury would likely have caused quadriplegia if Dr. King had survived. And here again lies an anomaly. A high-velocity .30-06 round fired from across the street executed a near 90-degree redirection inside of Martin Luther King Jr.'s body, fragmenting without ever leaving his body. Its remnants contained wholly within MLK Jr.'s body and his clothing. This defied clean penetration expectations and once again harkens forward to Charlie Kirk's lodged round and the alleged scattered shards throughout his body, prompting whispers of ballistic improbabilities that have echoed through decades of conspiracy debates. So you got a .30-06 with Martin Luther King Jr. also hitting his body at a close range, not doing what people thought it should do or would have done, bouncing around at all these improbable angles, shattering his innards and his skeletal structure in a similar way that Charlie Kirk, and there's no exit wound or never leaves his body. It's very, very similar to Charlie Kirk. And just consider this. We know for a fact, if you read into the story, that James Earl Ray was not the guy who killed Martin Luther King Jr. In fact, if you do some research yourself, you will see that Martin Luther King Jr.'s own family members became friends with James Earl Ray because they wholeheartedly, based on independent investigations, people they had talked to, and evidence that they collected over the years, they, for the most part, all believed that James Earl Ray was innocent. He was a patsy, a sort of fall guy. I could do an entire episode on that in the future, but there's so much wrong with that story, it isn't even funny. But we see that same similar bullet travel in his body as we also see in Charlie Kirk's. So it's definitely a little odd. Similarly, the November 22nd, 1963 assassination of President John F. Kennedy in Dallas presents a tapestry of ballistic riddles. The fatal shot taken at JFK, captured in the Zapruder film, propelled John F. Kennedy's head backwards, like this. A motion long cited as being evidence of there having been a shooter in the front, which has fueled countless theories of multiple gunmen, the grassy knoll. Yet dynamical models, according to officials, reveal this as having been consistent with a rear impact. The infamous magic bullet, Commission Exhibit 399, allegedly passed through JFK's neck and Governor Connolly's body, tumbling and deforming in various ways that strain credulity. Yet forensic recreations attribute its zigzagging path to yaw and bone deflection. I mean, obviously, we could talk about JFK all day. The dozens, if not over 100 people that were killed. There's a whole book written about this, The Hit List, talking about all the witnesses and people who knew something that ended up dead in mysterious ways, all based on the JFK assassination. But yeah, there's just a lot to talk about there. I even have a 70-page script ready to go that I'm going to be releasing in November about the JFK assassination that is truly mind-blowing. Needless to say, though, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of unexplained circumstances and pieces of evidence in the JFK assassination but also in the MLK assassination, and now in the Kirk assassination. None of this makes sense. Magic bullets appear and disappear, bullets and fragments travel through bodies in bizarre, almost unexplainable ways, and mystery abounds. This seems to be an observable pattern, where official explanations stretch to accommodate inconvenient forensic evidence. Were these deflections and inconsistencies mere quirks of fate, or signs of an engineered deception and deeper plot? The echoes grow louder, urging us to question if Charlie Kirk's death followed a scripted path, taken directly from the pages of American historical tragedy. As twilight descends over the Utah Valley where Charlie Kirk met his untimely end, the official narrative continues to unravel like a frayed thread in a grand tapestry of deception. What began as a seemingly straightforward act of lone wolf extremism morphs under the relentless gaze of inquiry into a labyrinth of impossibilities. A bullet that dances through vertebrae with acrobatic defiance, shadows that flicker and fade in the digital ether, motives that whisper of foreign intrigue and domestic betrayal. Charlie Kirk, though effectively silenced, now beckons at us from beyond, his silenced voice a clarion call to peel back the layers of this mystery. Yet, the quest does not end here. It merely pauses. Why did the 30-06, a cartridge forged in the fires of war and tested on battlefields, choose this moment to forsake its penetrating destiny? How could a rooftop perch yield a trajectory that mocks geometry, unless unseen hands guided its arc? And in the echoes of MLK's fragmented round, lodged in his shoulder after a serpentine journey through his jaw and neck, or JFK's backward snap which defied frontal illusions, do we glimpse a blueprint for engineered ambiguity? Folks, these aren't just historical footnotes. They seem to be spectral guides, illuminating the possibility that Charlie Kirk's assassination was no random thunderbolt, but a meticulously orchestrated strike against the heart of future and potential dissent. Imagine, if you will, the dimly lit rooms where decisions are made in whispers, Epstein's ghosts mingling with geopolitical chess pieces. It was in these secret rooms where conservative firebrands like Charlie Kirk and others were seemingly deemed to have been threats to the fragile systems that enabled the rooms in the first place. The leaked texts, the foreign funding probes, the internal rifts within Turning Point USA, when viewed as a whole, each of these facts, a puzzle piece of their own, helps to form a mosaic of motive, each tile a clue in this non-fiction thriller where truth is the ultimate prize. As investigators cluster on the perimeters of this equation, avoiding the core like guardians of forbidden knowledge, one wonders what secrets lie buried in unredacted reports, raw footage, and the silenced witnesses. In this era of fractured trust, Charlie Kirk's death demands more than a eulogy. It cries out for a revelation. The prosecution's path to conviction, paved with 8th grade math fallacies, teeters on the brink of collapse, much like the American nation's faith in its own sacred institutions. Will the Menendez brothers' legal titan expose the charade, or will the deep state shadows prevail? Unfortunately for us at home, the veil seems to be lifting slowly, revealing not closure in the case, but a deeper abyss of intrigue and evil. And what are we left with here? Well, what seems to be an enduring mystery, a testament to the power and frequency of unanswered questions in the American experiment. Thank you guys for watching today. I cannot thank you all enough for joining me for this week's episode. Clearly, I did not align with Charlie politically on almost everything, but that's its own thing. I try to not make my politics a thing here on this channel, but I do believe that there's definitely something more nefarious that happened to him. So if you've enjoyed today's video, please be sure to leave me a like, share this video out, and comment what you think of this whole thing. Your comments, your likes, your subscribes, your shares help boost this channel's visibility. I cannot thank all of you guys enough for joining me on this journey. We're almost at 300,000 subscribers, which is absolutely incredible. But anyways, y'all, I want to let y'all get going. Have a great rest of your week. Thank you so much for listening or watching. If you're listening to the show, be sure to leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, please. As always, everybody, stay suspicious, always question everything, keep that tinfoil hat on, and I'll see you next week.